The house key trembled in my hand as I stood before the front door. 3 days in the hospital had felt like 3 years, and all I wanted was to collapse into my own bed, wrapped in the familiar scent of home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch, and somewhere in the distance a dog was barking. I turned the key slowly, not wanting to wake anyone if they were napping. The door creaked open and I stepped inside, my hospital bag rustling softly against my leg. The house felt different somehow, warmer, more alive than when I'd left it. Voices drifted down from upstairs, low and intimate, followed by the unmistakable sound of laughter. My heart began to race, but not with joy. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed toward our bedroom, each step echoing through the silence like a countdown. At the top of the landing I paused. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the crack I could see movement, shadows dancing against the wall. I pushed the door open. What I saw in that moment would haunt me for the rest of my life, but it would also become the catalyst for the most elaborate revenge I could ever imagine. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. 3 weeks earlier, the accident had been sudden and brutal. One moment I was driving home from my book club meeting thinking about the Thai takeout I'd pick up for dinner, and the next I was waking up in a hospital bed with tubes running into my arms and a splitting headache that made me nauseous. "Mrs. Griffin," the doctor had said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "You're very lucky. The drunk driver who hit you walked away without a scratch, but you suffered a severe concussion and some internal bruising. We're going to keep you here for observation, probably 3 to 4 days. 4 days. I'd never been away from home for that long, not since my wedding 5 years ago. My husband Dallas had been by my side when I first woke up, holding my hand and whispering sweet words about how scared he'd been when he got the call. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Josephine," he'd said, his green eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You mean everything to me." I'd squeezed his hand, feeling foolish for the warmth that spread through my chest. After 5 years of marriage, after all the small arguments about dirty dishes and whose turn it was to take out the trash, it was reassuring to know that he still loved me deeply. Dallas visited every day, bringing flowers and magazines and updates about work. He was a financial advisor at a small firm downtown, and his clients adored him. He had that easy charm that made everyone feel like they were his best friend within minutes of meeting him. "How's Megan doing?" I asked on the second day, referring to his elderly client who'd become something of a surrogate grandmother to both of us. "Oh, she's fine. Keeps asking about you actually. Wants to bring you some of her famous cookies when you get out." "And the Grants? Are they still worried about their retirement fund?" Dallas's smile flickered for just a moment. "Yeah, they're fine too. Don't worry about work stuff, Josephine, just focus on getting better." On the third day my sister Cynthia came to visit. She lived 2 hours away and had driven down as soon as she'd heard about the accident. We'd always been close despite being complete opposites. Where I was cautious and thoughtful, Cynthia was impulsive and outspoken. Where I preferred quiet evenings at home with a book, she thrived on nightlife and adventure. "You look terrible," she said, dropping into the visitor's chair with her usual lack of filter. "Thanks, that's exactly what every recovering accident victim wants to hear." She grinned and pulled out a box of chocolates from her oversized purse. "These are from the fancy place downtown. I figured hospital food couldn't be worse, but just in case." We talked for hours about everything and nothing. Cynthia told me about her latest dating disaster. A guy who'd shown up to their coffee date wearing a shirt that said, "World's Okayest Lover." And I filled her in on the neighborhood drama she'd missed. "Mrs. Jenkins caught someone going through her garbage again," I said, unwrapping one of the chocolates. "She's convinced it's part of some elaborate identity theft scheme. Or maybe she throws away really good stuff," Cynthia suggested. "Remember when we found that vintage jewelry box in old Mrs. Peterson's trash when we were kids?" The memory made me laugh, which sent a spike of pain through my ribs. Cynthia's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Are you okay? Should I call the nurse?" No, I'm fine. Just still sore." I adjusted my position carefully. "The doctor says I might get out tomorrow if my latest scan comes back clean." "That's great. Dallas must be excited to have you home." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. "What do you mean?" Nothing, just, you know how men are when they have to fend for themselves. He's probably living off cereal and takeout by now. She was right, of course. Dallas was many things, but domestic wasn't one of them. I'd often joked that he'd starve to death if left to his own devices for more than a few days. That evening, after Cynthia had gone back to her hotel, I called Dallas to let him know I might be coming home a day early. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Dallas Griffin. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." I left a message asking him to call me back, then tried again an hour later. Still no answer. It wasn't unusual for him to miss calls. He often forgot to charge his phone or left it in another room, but something about the silence felt different tonight. Maybe it was the pain medication making me paranoid, or maybe it was the way he'd seemed distracted during his visit that morning. The next morning, Dr. Patel came in with my test results and a smile. "Everything looks good, Mrs. Griffin. You're cleared to go home, but I want you to take it easy for the next week. No driving, no heavy lifting, and if you experience any dizziness or nausea, call us immediately." I thanked her and gathered my few belongings, eager to get back to my normal life. The hospital had been good to me, but there was nothing like sleeping in your own bed. The taxi ride home took 20 minutes through familiar streets lined with oak trees and neat front lawns. It was a beautiful neighborhood, the kind where people still waved to each other and borrowed cups of sugar. Dallas and I had bought our house here 3 years ago, a modest 2-story with blue shutters and a small garden that I'd spent countless weekend hours perfecting. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Dallas's car wasn't there. He was probably at work, which was fine. I had my keys, and honestly I was looking forward to a quiet hour or two alone before he got home. I paid the taxi driver and walked slowly up the front steps, my ribs still aching with each breath. The house key felt heavy in my hand and I fumbled with it for a moment before getting the door open. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was different. The house smelled like vanilla candles, which was strange because I'd never bought vanilla candles. I preferred lavender or eucalyptus. There was also something else. A perfume I didn't recognize, something floral and expensive. I set my hospital bag down in the entryway and listened. The house wasn't empty. There were voices coming from upstairs, muffled but definitely there. A woman's laugh, light and musical, followed by Dallas's deeper chuckle. My first thought was that maybe Cynthia had driven back down to surprise me and Dallas had gotten home early from work to welcome me back. But Cynthia's laugh was loud and boisterous, nothing like the delicate sound I'd just heard. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step sending a dull ache through my injured ribs. The voices were coming from our bedroom, and as I got closer I could make out words. "We should probably get dressed soon," the woman was saying. "She might call." "Relax," Dallas replied, his voice lazy and content. "She won't be out until tomorrow. We have all night." I stopped breathing. The bedroom door was slightly open and through the gap I could see our bed. The bed Dallas and I had picked out together, the bed where we'd made love on our wedding night, the bed where I'd cried into his shoulder when my father died last year. Dallas was there, his back to the door, and beneath him was a woman with long auburn hair and porcelain skin. She was beautiful in a way that made my chest tight, the kind of beauty that belonged in magazines and movies, not in small suburban bedrooms with middle-class husbands. They were moving together in a rhythm I recognized, a rhythm that belonged to me and Dallas. And the woman was making soft sounds of pleasure that cut through me like broken glass. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my marriage dissolve before my eyes. The woman's hands were running through Dallas's hair, the same way I did, and she was whispering things to him that I couldn't quite hear but could feel in the way he responded to her touch. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a drunken mistake. This was intimate and familiar, the kind of intimacy that comes from knowing someone's body, from having done this many times before. How long had this been going on? The woman turned her head slightly, and for a terrifying moment I thought she might see me. But her eyes were closed, lost in the moment, and Dallas was too focused on her to notice anything else. I backed away from the door on trembling legs, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they would hear it. I made it to the top of the stairs before my knees gave out and I had to grab the banister to keep from falling. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, about Dallas had just crumbled to pieces. The man I'd trusted with my heart, the man who'd held my hand in the hospital and told me he couldn't live without me, was upstairs making love to another woman in our bed. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of the house before they came downstairs, before I had to face the reality of what I'd just witnessed. But where could I go? My car was still at the auto shop getting repaired after the accident, and I couldn't exactly call a taxi and explain that I was fleeing my own home because my husband was cheating on me. I was trapped. The smart thing would have been to march back up those stairs and confront them both. To demand answers, to scream and cry and let all my rage and heartbreak pour out in one explosive moment. But I didn't do that. Instead, I crept back down the stairs and out the front door, closing it as quietly as I could. I walked to the end of the driveway and sat down on the curb, my whole body shaking. The late afternoon sun was warm on my face and the neighborhood was peaceful. Mrs. Jenkins was watering her flowers across the street, and somewhere a lawnmower was running. It was such a normal, ordinary day, and yet my entire world had just collapsed. I sat there for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd seen and what it meant. My marriage was over, that much was clear. But there were so many questions racing through my mind that I couldn't focus on any one of them for long. Who was she? How had they met? How long had this been going on? Did he love her? Was he planning to leave me for her? And then, cutting through all the other questions like a knife, came the one that hurt the most. What was wrong with me that wasn't wrong with her? I was still sitting on the curb. 10 minutes later she came back out, kissed Dallas goodbye on the front porch and drove away. Dallas stood in the doorway watching her go, a satisfied smile on his face that I'd never seen before. He looked happy. Happier than I'd seen him in months. I waited until he went back inside before I stood up and brushed off my jeans. My legs were still shaky and my ribs ached from sitting on the hard concrete, but I felt oddly calm now. The initial shock was wearing off and something else was taking its place. Something cold and calculating and infinitely more dangerous than the hurt and confusion I'd felt earlier. I walked back up the driveway and let myself into my own house. Dallas. I called out, keeping my voice light and normal. I'm home. He appeared at the top of the stairs, and for just a moment, I saw panic flash across his face before he covered it with a smile. Josephine. You're back early. I thought they were keeping you until tomorrow. Doctor said I could come home today. Surprise. I forced myself to smile back at him even though it felt like my face might crack from the effort. He came down the stairs and pulled me into a hug, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. He smelled like sex and her perfume, and when he kissed my forehead I could taste the lie on his lips. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice full of concern that I now knew was fake. Tired but glad to be home. This house feels so empty without you. If he caught the irony in my words, he didn't show it. I'll make us some dinner, he offered. Thai food? From that place you like. That sounds perfect. I watched him bustle around the kitchen, opening takeout menus and talking about his day at work, and I marveled at how easily he could lie. He was telling me about a client meeting that probably never happened, about how much he'd missed me while I was gone, about how excited he was to have me home. All of it was performance, and he was very, very good at it. We ate dinner sitting across from each other at the small dining room table, making small talk about my recovery and his work. He asked about my sister's visit, and I told him about the chocolates and Mrs. Jenkins' garbage thief. That woman is paranoid, he said, laughing. Remember when she thought the mailman was reading her magazines? Maybe he was. Maybe everyone in this neighborhood has secrets we don't know about. Something flickered in his expression, but he recovered quickly. Speaking of secrets, I got you something while you were in the hospital. A welcome home present. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with my birthstone in the center. Dallas, it's beautiful. You didn't have to. I wanted to. I was so scared when you were in that accident. Josephine, it made me realize how much you mean to me. The bracelet was lovely, and under normal circumstances, I would have been touched by the gesture. But now all I could think about was whether he'd bought it before or after he'd started sleeping with her. Was it a gift born from love or from guilt? Put it on for me? I asked, holding out my wrist. His fingers were gentle as he fastened the clasp, and for a moment, I almost forgot what I'd seen upstairs. This was the Dallas I'd fallen in love with, the Dallas who brought me flowers for no reason and remembered how I liked my coffee. But that Dallas was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. That night we went to bed together for the first time since my accident. Dallas was tender and careful, mindful of my injuries, and if I hadn't known about her, I might have thought it was one of the most romantic nights we'd had in months. But I did know about her, and every kiss, every touch, every whispered endearment felt like a betrayal. When he fell asleep beside me, one arm draped protectively across my waist, I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what to do next. I could confront him. I could demand an explanation, threaten divorce, make him choose between us. But something told me that wouldn't be enough. He'd lied to me so easily, performed the role of loving husband so convincingly, that I couldn't trust anything he might say in his defense. No, if I was going to end this marriage, I was going to do it on my terms. I was going to find out everything there was to know about Dallas's affair, and then I was going to destroy him in a way that he'd never recover from. The next morning, Dallas left for work at his usual time, kissing me goodbye and reminding me to call if I needed anything. I waited until his car was out of sight before I got up and made myself a cup of coffee. My first instinct was to search the house to look for evidence of the affair. But I was smarter than that. If Dallas was clever enough to carry on a relationship for what seemed like months without me suspecting, he was probably clever enough not to leave obvious clues lying around. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad and started making a list of everything I knew. The woman was young, probably mid-20s, with auburn hair and expensive taste in clothes. She had a key to our house, which meant this wasn't a casual fling. They were serious enough that he'd given her access to our most private space. She drove a red sedan, though I hadn't gotten the license plate number. Most importantly, she and Dallas had been together while I was in the hospital. They'd made plans to spend the night together, which suggested they were in regular communication and comfortable with extended periods of time together. This wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. I needed to find out who she was, but I couldn't exactly hire a private investigator without risking Dallas finding out. I needed to be smart about this, to gather information slowly and carefully. My first stop was Dallas's home office. It was a small room off the living room that he used for client files and paperwork. I'd always respected his privacy and rarely went in there, but desperate times called for desperate measures. His computer was password protected, but I knew Dallas well enough to guess his passwords. He wasn't very creative when it came to security. He used some variation of his birthday, our anniversary, or our dog's name for everything. Took me 3 tries to get into his laptop. The password was Josephine0515, our wedding date. The irony wasn't lost on me. His email was clean, at least his main email account was. But when I checked his browser history, I found something interesting. He'd been visiting a lot of real estate websites lately, looking at apartments and condos in the downtown area. Was he planning to leave me? Or was he looking for a place for her? I dug deeper into his browsing history and found something even more disturbing. He'd been researching divorce law, specifically how assets were divided in our state and whether adultery affected alimony payments. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through page after page of legal websites. Dallas wasn't just cheating on me, he was planning to leave me, and he was making sure he understood the financial implications before he did it. I printed out several of the pages he'd visited and hid them in my book, then cleared the printer history and browser cache. If he was going to spy on me through his research, I could spy on him right back. But I needed more than web browsing history. I needed to know who she was and how they'd met. That afternoon, I called Dallas's office. Griffin Financial Services, this is Melissa. How can I help you? Melissa was Dallas's secretary, a sweet older woman who'd been with the firm for 15 years. She'd always been kind to me at office parties and client events. Hi Melissa, it's Josephine Griffin. Is Dallas available? Oh, hi Josephine. How are you feeling? Dallas told us all about your accident. We've been so worried. I'm much better, thank you. Actually, I wanted to surprise Dallas with lunch today, but I can't remember his schedule. Does he have any client meetings this afternoon? Let me check. He's got a 2 o'clock with the Johnsons, but he should be free around 3:30 if you want to come by then. Perfect. Has he been very busy while I was in the hospital? I know he hates when I'm not around to keep his schedule organized. Melissa laughed. Oh, you know Dallas. He's been his usual charming self, but I think he's been a little distracted. Actually, we had a new client come in last week. A young woman who's starting her own business. She's been in several times for consultations. My pulse quickened. Oh, how nice. It's always good when young people are thinking about their financial future. Absolutely. And she's lovely, very professional. I think her name is Victoria something. Victoria Blake, that's right. She owns that new boutique on 5th Street. Victoria Blake. I finally had a name. Well, I should let you get back to work. I'll see you later this afternoon. Looking forward to it, honey. Take care of yourself. I hung up the phone and immediately looked up Victoria Blake online. Her boutique, Blake's, had a website with photos of the interior and some of the clothing lines they carried. It was upscale, the kind of place that sold $100 scarves and designer handbags. The About Us page had a photo of Victoria, the same woman I'd seen in my bedroom, standing in front of the store with a bright smile. The biography described her as a local entrepreneur with a passion for bringing high-end fashion to our community. She was 26 years old, had graduated from the State University with a business degree, and had opened the boutique 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Right around the time Dallas had started working late more often. I spent the next hour researching everything I could find about Victoria Blake. Her business license was a matter of public record, and I found her home address through the property tax website. She lived in an expensive apartment complex downtown, the kind of place that had doormen and valet parking. How was a 26-year-old boutique owner affording a place like that? New businesses typically struggled for the first few years, especially retail shops in small markets. Unless she had help. Financial help. The more I learned about Victoria Blake, the angrier I became. She wasn't just sleeping with my husband, she was using him. Using his expertise to build her business, using his connections to meet potential customers, and probably using his money to maintain her expensive lifestyle. Dallas wasn't just betraying our marriage. He was being played by a woman who saw him as a stepping stone to the life she wanted. But anger, I was discovering, could be a very useful emotion when channeled properly. I drove downtown that afternoon, parking across the street from Blake's boutique. Through the large front windows, I could see Victoria moving around inside, arranging clothes and helping customers. She was even more beautiful in person than she'd been in our bedroom. She moved with confidence and grace, and every customer seemed charmed by her attention. I watched her for an hour, studying her mannerisms, her body language, the way she interacted with different types of people. She was smart, I'd give her that. And manipulative in a way that probably came naturally to her. At 5 o'clock she locked up the store and walked to the parking garage next door. A few minutes later the red sedan emerged and I followed her through downtown traffic. She didn't go to her expensive apartment. Instead she drove to a small coffee shop on the other side of town, the kind of place college students hung out to study and write poetry. Inside she met with a man I didn't recognize. Older, probably in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit. They sat at a corner table and their conversation looked intense and businesslike. Were there other men? Was Dallas just one of several sugar daddies funding Victoria Blake's lifestyle? I took photos with my phone, making sure to get clear shots of both Victoria and her companion. I didn't know who he was yet, but I had a feeling he was going to be important to the story I was piecing together. When Dallas came home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen with dinner already on the table. "This smells amazing," he said, loosening his tie. "What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to cook for my husband?" He smiled and sat down across from me. "How was your day? Did you rest like the doctor ordered?" "Mostly. I did drive to the bookstore this afternoon. I know, the doctor said no driving, but I was going stir-crazy." "Jose, you need to be more careful. What if you'd gotten dizzy behind the wheel?" His concern sounded genuine, and for a moment I almost felt guilty for lying to him. But then I remembered Victoria Blake's hands in his hair, and the guilt evaporated. "You're right. I'll be more careful. How was your day? Melissa mentioned you had a new client this week." Something flickered in his expression, so quick I almost missed it. "Yeah, a few new clients actually. Business has been picking up." "That's wonderful. Anyone interesting?" "Not particularly. Just the usual. People looking for retirement planning, investment advice. Nothing too exciting." He was lying so smoothly that I almost admired his skill. If I hadn't known about Victoria, I never would have suspected he was being anything less than completely honest. "I was thinking," I said carefully, "maybe we should start planning for our future too. We've been married 5 years now and we've never really talked seriously about long-term goals." "What kind of goals?" "I don't know. Kids maybe. A bigger house. You know, the things married couples usually want." Dallas's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Kids. We've talked about it before. I know we said we'd wait until we were more financially stable, but your business is doing so well now. Josephine, I don't think this is the right time to be making big decisions. You just got out of the hospital. You should focus on recovering. But when will be the right time? We're not getting any younger, Dallas. He set down his fork and reached across the table to take my hand. Let's talk about this in a few weeks, okay? When you're feeling completely back to normal. In other words, let's talk about it after I've figured out how to divorce you without losing too much money. I squeezed his hand and smiled. Of course. You're probably right. But inside I was already planning my next move. Over the next week I developed a routine. Dallas would leave for work and I would begin my investigation. I followed Victoria to her boutique, to lunch meetings with potential investors, to her expensive apartment building. I learned her schedule, her habits, her weaknesses. But the more I watched her, the more questions I had. Victoria Blake was living well beyond the means of a struggling boutique owner, even with Dallas's help. Her apartment rent alone was $3,000 a month and her car was leased, not financed. She wore different designer outfits every day and got her hair done at the most expensive salon in town twice a week. Either Dallas was giving her a lot more money than a financial advisor should have access to, or there was another source of income one hadn't discovered yet. The answer came on Thursday afternoon when I followed Victoria to a lunch meeting at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. She was meeting with the same older man I'd seen her with at the coffee shop, but this time their interaction looked more personal. I managed to get a table across the restaurant where I could observe them without being noticed. They held hands across the table and he kissed her when she got up to use the restroom. This wasn't a business meeting. This was a date. Victoria Blake wasn't just cheating on Dallas with my husband, she was cheating on both of them with someone else. I took more photos and managed to overhear enough of their conversation to learn that the man's name was Richard something. He mentioned his wife several times, complaining about her spending habits and her suspicions about his business trips. When they left the restaurant, I followed Richard to the parking lot and got his license plate number. It took some creative internet searching, but I eventually identified him as Richard Hawthorne, a prominent businessman who owned several car dealerships across the state. Richard Hawthorne was married, extremely wealthy, and apparently funding Victoria Blake's lifestyle while she carried on simultaneous affairs with him and my husband. The web of deception was even more complicated than I'd imagined, and I wasn't sure yet how I could use this information to my advantage. But I knew it was important. That evening I made a decision that would change everything. I called my sister Cynthia. Josephine, how are you feeling? I've been worried about you since I left. I need to ask you a favor. A big favor. Of course. What do you need? I took a deep breath. I need you to help me catch Dallas cheating. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought she might have hung up. Josephine, what are you talking about? I told her everything. About coming home early from the hospital, about what I'd seen in our bedroom, about Victoria Blake and Richard Hawthorne and all the lies Dallas had been telling me. Oh my God, Cynthia said when I finished. Josephine, I'm so sorry. What do you want to do? I want to destroy him. I get that. But what's the plan? Do you want me to help you confront him? We could. No. I want to be smart about this. I want to gather enough evidence that when I divorce him, he won't be able to lie his way out of anything. And I want him to lose everything that matters to him. Cynthia was quiet for a moment. That sounds intense. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? You just got out of the hospital and this is a huge shock. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Dallas has been lying to me about everything, Cynthia. Our marriage, our future, probably our finances. I need to know the full extent of his deception before I make any decisions. What do you need me to do? I need you to help me get into his office after hours. I think there are things on his work computer that aren't on his home computer. Financial records, maybe emails he thinks are secure. Josephine, that's breaking and entering. It's my husband's office. I have a right to know if he's stealing from our marriage to fund his girlfriend's boutique. Another long pause. When? This weekend. He's going to a conference in the state capital. At least that's what he told me. It's probably just a cover story so he can spend the weekend with Victoria, but either way he'll be gone for 2 days. I'll drive down Friday night. Thank you, Cynthia. I know this is crazy, but I need to know the truth. I love you, Josephine. We'll figure this out together. After I hung up, I felt calmer than I had since discovering the affair. Having a plan, having someone on my side, made the whole situation feel more manageable. Friday evening, Dallas packed a small suitcase and kissed me goodbye. "I'll call you when I get to the hotel," he said. "Take care of yourself while I'm gone." "I will. Have a good conference." "I love you, Josephine." He said it so easily, so naturally that for a moment I almost believed him. But then I thought about Victoria Blake's hands on his body, and the illusion shattered. "I love you too." 2 hours after Dallas left, Cynthia arrived with a bottle of wine and a grim expression. "I still think this is insane," she said, pulling me into a hug. "But I'm here." We spent the evening going over the plan. Dallas's office building had basic security, key card access, and a security guard who made rounds every few hours. But the building also housed several other small businesses, including an accounting firm that worked late during tax season and a law office that often had evening appointments. I had Dallas's key card. He'd given me one years ago in case of emergencies, and I'd never thought to return it. "What if we get caught?" Cynthia asked, refilling her wine glass. "We won't. And even if we did, what are they going to do? I'm his wife. I have legal access to his financial records." "Do you though? I mean legally?" "I don't know, and I don't care. I need to see what he's hiding." At 10 o'clock, we drove downtown to Dallas's building. The parking garage was mostly empty except for a few cars belonging to people working late. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and I used Dallas's key card to get into the suite of offices. Griffin Financial Services was dark and quiet. I led Cynthia through the waiting area to Dallas's private office, my heart pounding with adrenaline and fear. His computer was locked, but I knew his passwords. Within minutes, I was scrolling through his files. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Dallas hadn't just been having an affair with Victoria Blake. He'd been embezzling money from his clients to fund her business. The evidence was all there in spreadsheets and bank transfers. He'd been skimming small amounts from several different accounts over the past 6 months, moving the money through a series of shell companies before it ended up in accounts belonging to Blake's boutique. "Jesus Christ," Cynthia whispered, looking over my shoulder at the screen. "How much money are we talking about?" I did a quick calculation. At least $200,000. Maybe more. "Josephine, this isn't just adultery. This is felony embezzlement. He could go to prison for this." I printed out the most damning documents, my hands shaking with rage. Dallas hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd betrayed his clients, people who trusted him with their life savings and retirement funds. "Look at this," I said, pointing to one of the accounts. "This is Megan Miller. She's 78 years old. Dallas has been her advisor for 3 years. She trusts him completely." Cynthia leaned closer to read the screen. "He took $15,000 from her account? Over 4 months. Small amounts that she probably wouldn't notice right away." I scrolled through more files. The Grants lost $12,000. Volsky's $8,000. He's been systematically stealing from people who see him as family. The full scope of Dallas's crimes was becoming clear, and with it came a cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore. This was about justice for all the people he'd wronged. "We need to copy everything," I said, inserting a flash drive into his computer. "Every document, every spreadsheet, every email. What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done. All of it." We spent 2 hours going through Dallas's files. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. He'd been stealing from clients for nearly a year, not just 6 months. The total amount was closer to $400,000, and some of the victims were people who could barely afford the losses. But the most shocking discovery came when I opened his email drafts folder. There was a message addressed to Victoria Blake, dated 3 days ago, that he'd apparently written but never sent. I can't keep doing this much longer. Josephine's getting suspicious, and the audit at work is scheduled for next month. I think we need to move up our timeline. The divorce papers are ready, and I've moved most of our joint assets into the offshore account we discussed. We should be able to disappear to Costa Rica by the end of the month if everything goes according to plan. I love you." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Dallas wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to steal our joint assets and flee the country with Victoria Blake. "Cynthia, look at this." She read the email over my shoulder, her face growing pale. "Josephine, you need to call the police. Right now." "Not yet. I need more evidence, and I need to make sure Victoria doesn't disappear before I can expose both of them. This is getting dangerous. What if they realize? What if they try to leave earlier than planned? I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. They won't. Dallas thinks I'm the same trusting wife I've always been. He has no idea I've figured any of this out. I copied the draft email and several others that detailed Dallas and Victoria's plans. They'd been corresponding through a private email account that he'd hidden from me, planning every detail of their escape. Victoria Blake wasn't just a manipulative gold digger, she was a criminal accomplice. She'd known about the embezzlement from the beginning and had helped Dallas plan how to cover their tracks. By the time we left Dallas's office, I had enough evidence to destroy both of them. But I wasn't ready to turn it over to the police yet. I wanted to execute my own form of justice first. What's the plan now? Cynthia asked as we drove home. I'm going to give them exactly what they want. What do you mean? I turned to look at her and she actually flinched at whatever she saw in my expression. I'm going to help them disappear. Dallas returned from his conference on Sunday evening with a guilty smile and a small gift. A bottle of expensive perfume that I was sure Victoria had helped him pick out. How was the conference? I asked, accepting his kiss and trying not to pull away from his touch. Boring mostly. A lot of presentations about new tax regulations and investment strategies. But I learned some things that might help our clients. Our clients. The same clients he'd been systematically robbing for months. I missed you, he said, pulling me into a hug. The hotel was nice, but it's not the same as sleeping next to you. I missed you too. The lie came so easily now. I was becoming as good at deception as he was. Over the next few days I put my plan into motion. The first step was establishing my own financial safety net. I opened a new bank account at a different bank under my maiden name, using my birth certificate and an old utility bill from before we were married. I transferred a small amount of money from our joint savings, not enough for Dallas to notice, but enough to give me options if things went wrong. The second step was gathering more evidence about Victoria's other relationships. I spent Tuesday following her to another lunch date with Richard Hawthorne, and this time I was prepared. I'd borrowed Cynthia's camera with a telephoto lens, and I managed to get dozens of photos of Victoria and Richard together. They were clearly intimate, kissing, holding hands, gazing into each other's eyes like teenagers in love. But the most interesting photos came when they left the restaurant together and went to a nearby hotel. I waited in the lobby, pretending to read a magazine until they came back down 2 hours later. Richard kissed Victoria goodbye and slipped her an envelope before they parted ways. I followed Victoria to her car and watched her open the envelope. Even from a distance I could see it was full of cash. Richard Hawthorne wasn't just having an affair with Victoria Blake. He was paying for it. That evening I made another discovery that changed everything. Dallas was working late again, or so he claimed, and I decided to do some more research on Victoria's background. I'd been so focused on her current activities that I hadn't dug very deeply into her past. What I found was fascinating. Victoria Blake wasn't her real name. She'd been born Victoria Chin in California, and she had a criminal record. 3 arrests for fraud and identity theft, though she'd only been convicted once and had served probation instead of jail time. She'd moved to our state 2 years ago, around the same time she'd legally changed her name to Victoria Blake. The boutique wasn't her first business. She'd run several other ventures that had failed under suspicious circumstances. Victoria Blake was a professional con artist, and Dallas was just her latest mark. But here's where my plan got really interesting. Victoria didn't know that I knew about any of this. She thought she was playing both Dallas and Richard, keeping them isolated from each other while she robbed them both blind. What she didn't realize was that I was about to introduce them to each other. Wednesday evening I called Richard Hawthorne's office. Hawthorne Automotive, this is Megan. How can I help you? Hi, I'm calling about Mr. Hawthorne's appointment tomorrow. I'm with Blake's boutique and we need to reschedule. Let me check his calendar. I don't see any appointment with Blake's boutique scheduled. Perfect. That meant Victoria was keeping her meetings with Richard secret from his secretary, which suggested they were being very careful about their affair. Oh, I'm sorry. This might be a personal appointment. Could you give me his direct number so I can call him myself? I can't give out his personal number, but I can take a message if you'd like. That's okay, I'll figure something else out. Thank you. I hung up and immediately called Dallas's office. Griffin Financial Services, this is Melissa. Hi Melissa, it's Josephine. Is Dallas available? He's with a client right now, honey. Can I have him call you back? Actually, I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm trying to plan a surprise party for Dallas's birthday next month, and I wanted to invite some of his newer clients. Didn't you mention he had a client who owns a boutique? I thought she might be fun to include. Oh, you mean Victoria Blake? What a sweet idea. She's lovely and I think she'd enjoy meeting Dallas's wife. Let me get her information for you. Melissa gave me Victoria's phone number and email address, both of which I already had, but more importantly, she confirmed that Victoria had been coming to Dallas's office regularly for financial consultations. The pieces of my revenge were falling into place. Thursday afternoon I made 2 phone calls that would set everything in motion. The first call was to Richard Hawthorne's personal cell phone, which I'd gotten by calling his dealership and pretending to be a customer with an urgent question about a warranty. This is Richard. Mr. Hawthorne, my name is Josephine Griffin. I believe you know my husband, Dallas Griffin. There was a long pause. I'm not familiar with that name. Really? That's strange because he's been having an affair with the same woman you have. Victoria Blake. The silence stretched even longer this time. I think you have the wrong number. Victoria Blake, also known as Victoria Chin. Auburn hair, green eyes, drives a red Toyota Camry. She owns Blake's boutique on 5th Street, though I'm sure you already know that since you've been funding it. What do you want? His voice had gone cold and dangerous, but I wasn't intimidated. I want to meet with you. Tomorrow 2 o'clock at the coffee shop on Elm Street. Come alone. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'm going to call your wife and tell her about your afternoon hotel visits. I have photos, Mr. Hawthorne. Very detailed photos. He hung up without saying goodbye, but I knew he'd be there. The second call was to Dallas. Josephine? Is everything okay? I'm fine, but I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come home early today? What's wrong? You sound upset. I'll explain when you get here. It's about us, Dallas. About our future. I could hear the worry in his voice when he agreed to leave work immediately. Dallas arrived home 20 minutes later, his face tight with concern. What's going on, Em? You're scaring me. I was waiting for him in the living room, sitting in the chair that faced the front door. I'd positioned myself so that the afternoon light was behind me, casting my face in shadow. I know, Dallas. Know what? I know about Victoria Blake. I know about the money you've been stealing from your clients. I know about your plans to leave the country. The color drained from his face so quickly that I thought he might faint. Josephine, I can explain. No, you can't. There's no explanation that would make any of this acceptable. He sank onto the couch across from me, his hands shaking. How long have you known? Since the day I came home from the hospital. I saw you with her in our bed. Dallas buried his face in his hands. Oh God. Josephine, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Which part? The affair or the embezzlement? His head snapped up. You know about the clients? I know about everything. The offshore accounts, the fake identities you've been researching, the house you've been looking at in Costa Rica. Dallas stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. What are you going to do? That depends on you. What do you mean? I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm and steady. I'm going to give you a choice, Dallas. You can do the right thing. Turn yourself in to the police, confess to your crimes, pay back the money you stole, and face the consequences like a man. Or what? Or you can stick to your original plan. Disappear with Victoria, start your new life in Costa Rica, and hope I never find you. He was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. You're not serious. I'm completely serious. But if you choose option 2, you should know that Victoria Blake isn't who you think she is. I slid a manila envelope across the coffee table toward him. Her real name is Victoria Chin and she's a convicted felon. She's also taking money from at least one other man, Richard Hawthorne. He's married, wealthy, and completely infatuated with her. Dallas opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were copies of Victoria's criminal record, photos of her with Richard, and bank statements showing deposits from multiple sources. She's been playing you, Dallas. Just like she's playing Richard, just like she's probably played dozens of other men. You're not special to her. You're just another mark in a long line of marks. Dallas was staring at the photos, his face cycling through a dozen different emotions. This can't be right. He loves me. We're building a life together. The life you're building is based on money you've stolen from innocent people. And the woman you're building it with is a professional con artist who will disappear the moment she finds a better target. You're lying. Am I? Call her right now. Tell her you want to move up the timeline, that you want to leave for Costa Rica this weekend. See how quickly she comes up with excuses. Dallas pulled out his phone, his hands still shaking. He dialed Victoria's number and put it on speaker. Dallas? Is everything okay? You sound strange. I need to see you. Tonight. It's important. I can't tonight, baby. I have a business dinner with a potential investor. What about tomorrow? Victoria, I think we need to move up our timeline. Leave for Costa Rica this weekend instead of next month. There was a long pause. Dallas, we've talked about this. The timing has to be perfect. We can't rush these things or we'll make mistakes. But I love you. Don't you want to start our new life together? Of course I do, but we have to be smart about it. Look, I really can't talk right now. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? She hung up before Dallas could respond. Dallas stared at the phone, then at me, then at the photos scattered on the coffee table. She's with him right now, isn't she? He said quietly. Probably. Thursday night is her regular dinner date with Richard. Dallas was quiet for a long time, processing everything I'd shown him. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were red-rimmed and defeated. What do you want from me, Josephine? I want you to choose. Prison or Costa Rica. But either way, our marriage is over. And if I choose Costa Rica? Then you'd better hope Victoria doesn't decide Richard is a better prospect than you are. Because when she abandons you in a foreign country with no money and no way home, you'll be completely on your own. Dallas was crying now, quiet tears that he didn't bother to wipe away. How did everything get so messed up? You made a series of choices, Dallas. Bad choices. And now you have to live with the consequences. I stood up and walked toward the door. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Pack whatever you want to take with you, but don't touch any of our joint accounts. I've already moved the money. Where are you going? To my sister's house. When I come back tomorrow, I want you gone. If you choose prison, leave a note with the name of your lawyer. If you choose Costa Rica, don't leave anything. Josephine, wait. I turned back to look at him one last time. I loved you, Dallas. I really truly loved you. But the man I loved never existed, did he? He didn't answer, and I didn't wait for one. I drove to Cynthia's hotel and spent the night there, going over my plan one final time. Everything had to happen in exactly the right order or the whole thing would fall apart. The next morning at exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into the coffee shop on Elm Street. Richard Hawthorne was already there, sitting at a corner table and looking uncomfortable. He was older than I'd expected, probably in his late 50s, with graying hair and expensive clothes that couldn't hide his soft middle. Mr. Hawthorne. He looked up at me with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. Mrs. Griffin, I assume. Thank you for coming. I sat down across from him and studied his face. He was handsome in the way that successful older men often were, well-groomed, confident, used to getting what he wanted. Let's get this over with, he said. What do you want? I want to show you something. I slid a tablet across the table and pressed play on a video I'd recorded the night before. It was Dallas's phone conversation with Victoria, the one where she'd blown off his request to move up their timeline. Richard's face went very still as he listened. Where did you get this? I recorded it yesterday evening while she was having dinner with you. That's impossible. Victoria doesn't know your husband. I opened a folder and spread out copies of the bank records I'd found in Dallas's office. Your girlfriend has been taking money from my husband for over a year. He's been embezzling from his clients to fund her boutique and her lifestyle. Richard studied the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. How much money? Nearly $500,000. And that's just what I've found so far. Son of a bitch. It gets worse. They're planning to disappear together. Leave the country, start new lives in Costa Rica. Richard looked up at me sharply. When? Originally next month, but Dallas tried to move up the timeline yesterday. Victoria told him she was too busy to see him because she was having dinner with a potential investor. She was with me. I know. Richard was quiet for a long time, processing the implications. What do you want from me? I want to know how much money you've given her. He didn't answer immediately, and I could see him calculating whether it was worth lying to me. Approximately 80,000. Maybe 90. Over what period of time? 6 months. I did the math in my head. Between Richard and Dallas, Victoria had scammed nearly $600,000 in the past year. She's good at this, I said. Apparently. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Richard leaned back in his chair. What did you have in mind? I think Victoria Blake needs to learn what it feels like to be betrayed. I'm listening. I pulled out my phone and showed him the draft email Dallas had written to Victoria about their escape plans. Dallas thinks they're leaving together. Victoria thinks she's playing both of you while planning her exit strategy. But what if neither of those things were true? Meaning what if Victoria discovered that her 2 sources of income were about to dry up simultaneously? What if she panicked and made a mistake that exposed her to people who wouldn't be as understanding as we've been? Richard's eyes narrowed. What kind of people? The kind who don't like being stolen from. I explained my plan to Richard, and by the time I finished, he was smiling for the first time since we'd met. You're more devious than I gave you credit for, Mrs. Griffin. Call me Josephine. And you haven't seen anything yet. We spent the next hour working out the details. Richard would call Victoria and tell her he was ready to leave his wife and wanted to take her away immediately. He'd offer to double the money he'd been giving her if she could disappear with him that weekend. At the same time, I would make sure Dallas found out about Victoria's relationship with Richard. Not through me. Dallas couldn't know I'd orchestrated any of this, but through an anonymous tip that would lead him to catch them together. The goal was to create a situation where Victoria was forced to choose between 2 angry, betrayed men, both of whom knew she'd been lying to them. But that was just the opening move. What about the money she's already stolen? Richard asked. That's where things get interesting. I explained the second part of my plan, and Richard's smile grew even wider. You're sure this will work? It'll work. The question is whether you're willing to go through with it. Richard thought about it for a moment, then nodded. She cost me $90,000 and made a fool out of me. I want her to pay for that. She will. Trust me, she'll pay for all of it. That evening, I returned home to find Dallas's car gone from the driveway. The house was eerily quiet, and for a moment I wondered if he'd chosen Costa Rica after all. But when I walked into the kitchen, I found a note on the table. Josephine, I chose prison. I called the police and confessed everything. I also called my lawyer John Morrison at Morrison & Associates. I'm sorry for what I did to you, and I'm sorry for what I did to my clients. You deserved better than me. Dallas. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the note 3 more times. Part of me felt a flicker of respect for Dallas's decision to turn himself in, but it was overwhelmed by anger at how long it had taken him to do the right thing. The local news ran the story that evening. Local financial advisor arrested for embezzlement. Dallas's mugshot flashed on the screen, and the reporter explained that he'd stolen nearly $500,000 from his clients over the course of a year. My phone started ringing immediately. Neighbors, friends, reporters wanting a statement from the betrayed wife. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Dallas was out of the picture, which meant Victoria Blake was about to lose her primary source of income. But I wasn't done with her yet. Saturday morning, I called Victoria's boutique. Blake's, this is Victoria. How can I help you? Victoria, this is Josephine Griffin. Dallas's wife. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I know about the affair, Victoria. I know about the money. And I know about your plans to leave the country together. Mrs. Griffin, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is yours. You thought you could steal from my husband and his clients without consequences. You thought you could destroy my marriage and disappear without anyone fighting back. I don't know what Dallas told you, but Dallas didn't tell me anything. I figured it out on my own. And now Dallas is in jail, which means your primary source of income just disappeared. Victoria was quiet for so long that I thought she might have hung up. What do you want? She finally asked. I want to meet with you. Today. 2 o'clock at your boutique. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think you have a choice. Because if you don't meet with me, my next call is to Richard Hawthorne's wife. Another long silence. How do you know about Richard? I know about everything, Victoria. Or should I call you Victoria Chin? The sound she made was barely audible, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. 2 o'clock, I repeated. Don't make me wait. I hung up before she could respond. At exactly 2 o'clock I walked into Blake's boutique. Victoria was waiting for me behind the counter and she looked terrible. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged, her hair was disheveled, and her hands were shaking. Close the store, I said. What? Turn the sign to closed, and lock the door. We need privacy for this conversation. Victoria did as I asked, her movements robotic and uncertain. When she turned back to face me, I could see that she'd been crying. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the small seating area near the fitting rooms. Victoria perched on the edge of a chair, looking like she might bolt for the door at any moment. Let's start with the basics, I said. How long have you been sleeping with my husband? Mrs. Griffin, I really don't think. Answer the question. 8 months. And how long have you been taking money from him? I never asked for money. Dallas offered to help with the business. How long, Victoria? 6 months. And Richard Hawthorne? How long have you been seeing him? Victoria's face crumpled. How do you know about Richard? I know about all of it. Your real name, your criminal record, the way you've been playing two men against each other while stealing from both of them. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. You're a con artist, Victoria. You target successful men, make them fall in love with you, and then bleed them dry. The only difference this time is that one of your marks was stealing from innocent people to pay for your lifestyle. Victoria was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. I didn't know Dallas was embezzling. I swear I didn't know. But you would have taken the money anyway. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to pay back every penny you took from Dallas and Richard. All of it. I don't have that kind of money. The boutique is barely breaking even. Then you'd better figure out a way to get it. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who Victoria Chin really is. I pulled out a thick manila envelope and set it on the table between us. Inside this envelope are copies of your criminal record, bank statements showing the money you've received from Dallas and Richard, photographs of you with both men, and recordings of conversations that prove you knew about Dallas's embezzlement. Victoria stared at the envelope like it was a poisonous snake. I also have contact information for Richard's wife, Dallas's clients, the state attorney general's office, and several journalists who would be very interested in your story. What do you want from me? I want you to disappear. Close the boutique, pay back the money, and get out of town. If I ever see you again, if you ever contact Dallas or Richard or anyone else in this city, I will destroy you. I can't just disappear. I have a lease, employees, customers. You should have thought of that before you decided to become a criminal. I stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back to look at her one last time. You have 72 hours, Victoria. After that, all bets are off. Wait, she called after me. Even if I wanted to pay the money back, I don't have it. The boutique has overhead, and Richard's wife has been watching his bank accounts more closely. That sounds like a personal problem. I left her sitting there in her failing boutique, surrounded by expensive clothes she couldn't afford and dreams she'd built on other people's money. But my revenge was far from over. Sunday evening, my phone rang. It was Victoria, and she sounded desperate. Josephine, please. I need more time. 72 hours isn't enough to liquidate everything. You've had months to plan your exit strategy with Dallas. I'm sure you can figure something out. I'll lose everything. The boutique, my apartment, my car. You mean you'll lose everything you bought with stolen money? How tragic. Please, there has to be another way. Maybe we can work out some kind of payment plan. The only plan I'm interested in is the one where you disappear completely. I hung up on her and turned off my phone. I had no intention of giving Victoria more time or negotiating with her, but I wanted her to spend the next few days in a state of panic. Because while she was panicking, I was setting the final stage of my revenge in motion. Monday morning, I drove to Richard Hawthorne's main dealership. The showroom was impressive. Rows of gleaming cars under bright lights, salespeople in suits ready to make deals. I asked to speak with Mr. Hawthorne, and after a brief wait, I was escorted to his office on the second floor. Josephine, he said, standing up from behind a massive desk. How did things go with Victoria? As expected. She's terrified and desperate, which means she's about to make some very poor decisions. What kind of decisions? I sat down across from his desk and pulled out my phone. The kind that will give us exactly the leverage we need to finish this. I showed Richard a series of text messages I'd received from Victoria over the past 24 hours. She'd gone from defiant to pleading to angry to desperate, cycling through every emotion as she realized the impossible position she was in. She's going to run, Richard said, reading the messages. Exactly. But she can't run without money, and she can't get money without taking bigger risks. What kind of risks? The kind that involve other people's credit cards, bank accounts, or jewelry. Victoria Chin is a convicted felon, Richard. When cornered, she'll revert to what she knows best. Richard leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. And when she does, we'll be ready for her. I explained the final phase of my plan to Richard, and by the time I finished he was laughing out loud. You're absolutely ruthless, he said with admiration. I prefer to think of it as thorough. That afternoon I made a phone call to Detective Lisa Rodriguez with the City Police Department. I'd researched her background carefully. She specialized in financial crimes and had a reputation for being both smart and persistent. Detective Rodriguez, my name is Josephine Griffin. My husband was the financial advisor who was arrested for embezzlement last week. Yes, I remember the case. How can I help you, Mrs. Griffin? I have information about someone who may have been involved in my husband's crimes. Someone who might be planning to commit additional crimes in the near future. I'm listening. I gave Detective Rodriguez Victoria's real name and criminal history, along with carefully edited versions of the evidence I'd gathered. I made it clear that Victoria had been taking money from Dallas, but I didn't mention Richard Hawthorne or my own investigation. We'll look into it, Detective Rodriguez promised. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. There's one more thing. I have reason to believe that Victoria Chin might try to flee the area in the next few days. If you're planning to question her, you might want to do it soon. We'll keep that in mind. Tuesday morning I drove past Blake's boutique and saw a store closing sale sign in the window. Victoria was liquidating everything just as I'd expected. I parked across the street and watched for 2 hours as Victoria moved desperately around the store, marking down prices and packing merchandise. She looked haggard and defeated, like a woman who'd finally run out of options. At noon, Richard Hawthorne's Mercedes pulled up in front of the boutique. He got out and walked inside, and I could see Victoria's face light up with desperate hope through the window. They talked for about 20 minutes, and I could tell from their body language that it wasn't going well. Richard was calm and controlled, while Victoria was animated and pleading. When Richard left, Victoria slumped against the counter like she might collapse. Phase 3 was in motion. Tuesday evening my phone rang again. Josephine, it's Victoria. I need to talk to you. I thought I made myself clear on Sunday. You have one more day. I spoke with Richard today. He said you two have been working together. I didn't respond. He told me everything. About your investigation, about the photos you took, about your plan to destroy me. And I want to make a deal. I'm not interested in deals, Victoria. What if I told you there was more money? Money that neither Dallas nor Richard knew about. Now she had my attention. What kind of money? I've been running other cons, smaller ones, but they add up. I have about $200,000 that I've been keeping as an emergency fund. Where? Safety deposit boxes, offshore accounts, cash hidden in my apartment. I was saving it for situations exactly like this one. And you're offering to give it to Dallas's victims? I'm offering to give it to you. In exchange for calling off your investigation and letting me disappear quietly. I thought about it for a moment. $200,000 would go a long way toward repaying Dallas's clients, and it would mean Victoria would leave town completely broke. But it wouldn't be enough. Not for what she'd done. No deal, I said. Josephine, please be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You destroyed my marriage, you helped my husband steal from innocent people, and you've been running cons that probably hurt dozens of other victims. $200,000 doesn't begin to cover that damage. Then what do you want? I want you to pay for your crimes. All of them. What does that mean? It means you should probably get a good lawyer, Victoria. You're going to need one. I hung up and immediately called Detective Rodriguez. Detective, it's Josephine Griffin. I have an update on Victoria Chin. What kind of update? She just confessed to running multiple financial scams and hiding money from her victims. I think you might want to talk to her before she leaves town. We were actually planning to visit her tomorrow morning. Thank you for the heads up. Detective, you might want to check her apartment and any safety deposit boxes she might have access to. She mentioned having emergency funds hidden in various places. We'll look into it. Wednesday morning, I positioned myself across the street from Victoria's apartment building with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. At exactly 9 o'clock, 3 unmarked police cars pulled up to the curb. I watched as Detective Rodriguez and several other officers entered the building. 20 minutes later, they came back out with Victoria Chin in handcuffs. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the reality of her situation. As they put her in the back of the police car, she looked around desperately, and for a moment her eyes met mine across the street. I raised my coffee cup in a small salute. The expression on her face was everything I'd hoped for: shock, betrayal, and the dawning realization that she'd been outplayed by someone she'd underestimated. The police cars drove away and I sat there for a few more minutes, savoring the moment. Victoria Chin was finally going to face justice for her crimes, and she was going to do it with nothing. No money, no allies, no way to manipulate her way out of the consequences. But I still had one more piece of business to finish. That afternoon I met with Richard Hawthorne one last time. At the same coffee shop where we'd first discussed our alliance. I saw the news about Victoria's arrest, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Financial fraud, identity theft, money laundering. They're throwing the book at her. She earned it. What about the money she mentioned? The emergency fund. The police found most of it. $230,000 hidden in various accounts and safety deposit boxes. It'll go toward restitution for her victims. Richard nodded approvingly. And Dallas's clients? They'll get most of their money back between Victoria's stash and the assets Dallas surrenders as part of his plea deal. It won't be everything, but it'll be enough for most of them to recover. What about us? What do we get out of all this? I studied Richard's face carefully. He'd been helpful during the investigation and he'd certainly been wronged by Victoria, but I hadn't forgotten that he was a married man who'd been having an affair and funding his mistress with family money. You get to go back to your wife without her ever finding out about Victoria. I'd say that's worth $90,000, wouldn't you? Richard's smile faltered slightly. And if I disagree? Then you'd be making a very poor decision. Mrs. Hawthorne seems like a lovely woman, and she deserves better than a husband who cheats on her with convicted felons. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then he laughed and shook his head. You really are something else, Josephine Griffin. I prefer to think of myself as thorough. We parted ways after that and I never saw Richard Hawthorne again. A year later, I read in the society pages that he and his wife had renewed their wedding vows at an expensive resort in Hawaii. Whether that meant he'd learned his lesson or just gotten better at hiding his affairs, I neither knew nor cared. My business with him was finished. 6 months after Victoria's arrest, I was sitting in my lawyer's office finalizing my divorce from Dallas. He was serving a 7-year sentence for embezzlement, and though he'd written me several letters from prison, I'd returned them all unopened. The house sale should close next week, my lawyer said, sliding a stack of papers across his desk. After legal fees and the restitution payments, you should clear about $200,000. Good. I want half of it to go into a trust fund for Dallas's victims, the ones who didn't get their full restitution. The other half goes into my Fresh Start Fund. Fresh Start Fund. I smiled. I'm moving to Seattle. New city, new job, new life. I figure after everything that's happened, I've earned a clean slate. The lawyer nodded and made notes on his legal pad. What about your husband's letters? He's been quite persistent. Return them. I have nothing to say to Dallas Griffin. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the living room of my new apartment in Seattle, looking out at the city skyline. It was a beautiful view, mountains in the distance, water glittering in the afternoon sun, a world full of possibilities stretching out before me. My phone buzzed with a text message from Cynthia. Saw the news about Victoria's sentencing. 12 years. You must be relieved. I was relieved. Victoria Chin had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. The judge had been particularly harsh because of her previous convictions and the number of victims involved. But more than relieved, I felt vindicated. I'd set out to make sure that everyone who'd wronged me faced consequences for their actions, and I'd succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Dallas was in prison, his reputation destroyed and his financial advisor license permanently revoked. Victoria was serving a lengthy sentence in a federal facility, her con artist days finally over. Even Richard Hawthorne had paid a price, if not in legal consequences, then in the fear and anxiety of knowing how close he'd come to losing everything. I'd given them all exactly what they deserved. As I unpacked the last of my boxes, I found a small framed photo that had been buried at the bottom of one of the containers. It was a picture of Dallas and me on our wedding day, both of us smiling and looking impossibly young and happy. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sadness for the woman I'd been then, so trusting, so naive, so completely unprepared for the betrayal that was coming. But that woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. Someone who understood that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford and that justice sometimes had to be taken rather than waited for. I looked at the photo for a long moment, then dropped it into the trash can. The past was finished. It was time to build a future. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine and sat on my new balcony, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay. My phone rang and I glanced at the caller ID, expecting it to be Cynthia or one of my new co-workers. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. Hello. Is this Josephine Griffin? Who's asking? My name is Detective Sarah Kim with the Seattle Police Department. I'm calling because we have a case that I think might interest you. What kind of case? A financial fraud case. The suspect is a woman who's been targeting married men, gaining their trust and then stealing from them. Her methods are sophisticated. I felt a familiar stirring of interest. What does this have to do with me? We understand you were instrumental in solving a similar case back in your hometown. We could use someone with your particular skills and insights. I thought about it for a moment. I'd planned to find a quiet job in Seattle, maybe work for a nonprofit or start a small business. Something peaceful and low-key. But the detective was right, I did have particular skills now. Skills I'd developed through necessity and honed through practice. Skills that could be useful in situations where justice needed a helping hand. Tell me more about the case, I said. As Detective Kim described the investigation, I found myself taking notes and asking questions. The suspect sounded familiar. Too familiar to be a coincidence. Detective, I said when she finished, what's the suspect's name? We're not entirely sure. She's been using multiple identities. But one of the names she's been going by is Victoria Blake. I nearly dropped my phone. Detective Kim, I said carefully, I think we need to meet in person. And I think I have some information that might be very useful to your investigation. How soon can you be at the station? I looked out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness, and for the first time in months, I felt truly excited about the future. Give me 20 minutes. Some people I'd learned never changed. They just moved to new cities and found new victims. But they'd made one crucial mistake in choosing Seattle as their next hunting ground. They'd moved to my city now. And I was very good at hunting hunters. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I found myself smiling. My new life was about to become very interesting indeed. After all, Victoria Chin had taught me something valuable during our last encounter. Revenge wasn't just about getting even. It was about making sure the lesson stuck. And some lessons I discovered required multiple teaching sessions to really sink in. I locked my apartment door behind me and headed out into the Seattle night, ready to begin my next chapter. The hunt was about to begin again.